Okay, it looks like it's noon, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Verbeck, and I'm your host for today. We're excited to have Meg Brunner from the Northwest ATTC here to talk to us about common barriers to finding valid science-based information online and recommend some best practices and tools for locating, vetting, and applying statistics, research, and other information related to substance use disorders and mental health. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that here at the ATTC, we believe that language matters and words have power. We strive to be culturally informed and inclusive, and we really value your feedback on how we're doing. Please email us at northwest@attcnetwork.org if you have any comments or suggestions. A couple of quick housekeeping things. First, if you have any questions for Ms. Brunner during the presentation, please type them into the chat box at any time. After she's done speaking, I'll read the questions to her so she can answer them. You'll also be getting an email at the end of today's webinar with a link to a survey in it. Please make sure you take that survey. It helps us bring you the content that you're most interested in. That email will also have a link to download the slides from today and a link to our website where you'll find a recording for the webinar later this afternoon. Okay. Additionally, we will be sending everyone who attends the live webinar today a certificate of attendance, and that takes us about a week to get those out. You don't need to do anything to get the certificate unless you're watching this in a group. In that case, please have someone in your group email us within a business day with the names and email addresses for everyone in the group that wants their certificate from us. Again, our email address is northwest@attcnetwork.org. And there it is up on the screen there. Okay, now on to the webinar. As mentioned earlier, today's speaker is Meg Brunner, who has been a librarian at the University of Washington Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute for over 20 years. She has served as chair of the Professional Society Substance Abuse Librarians and Informational Specialists, and is currently their newsletter editor. Some of the major projects she is involved in include the NIDA Clinical Trials Network, where she serves as a digital librarian for the Dissemination Library, and the Northwest Addiction Technology Transfer Center, where she focuses on information dissemination. She has expertise in information and media literacy, instructional design, and digital information organization and management. And with that, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Meg Brunner.
All right, thank you. Let's see here. Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all turn out for this. As Jen mentioned, I'm Meg Brunner, and I'm here today to talk to you about how to find valid information about substance use disorders and health in general online. As a librarian, I spend a lot of time looking for information on the web, and even as someone who's pretty highly experienced, it can be a real challenge sometimes to find the information I need and to make sure that information is legit. And this is only getting harder as the web expands, social media explodes, and more folks with bad intentions jam the airways, so to speak, with fake facts. So today I'm going to talk about 3 commonly accessed sources of information about substance use disorders and health online, some steps you can take to vet the information you find in those sources, and what specific resources I recommend as good starting places whenever you're seeking information. So those 3 common sources are news articles, both on actual news media sites and on social media, websites in general, and online journal articles and other scholarly publications. Okay, so let's start with news articles because they're often the first exposure we get to a new piece of scientific or health-related information, as well as information about new policies or policy proposals related to our work. So anyone who's on social media has probably seen the enormous uptick in misleading news stories that's been overwhelming every platform for years now. As more news sites have cropped up, both legitimate and illegitimate, more and more news stories have shown up on social media where people have a very bad habit of sharing them without critically examining them first. A big part of the problem there is that we've pretty much never had so much access to so many news organizations. Instead of the 1 or 2 local newspapers and our local network TV news station, we can now access hundreds of local newspapers and dozens of cable news stations and video channels. And this is just a teeny tiny sampling of the hundreds, if not thousands, of news organization pages on Facebook. It's a lot. But only some of those are real news organizations with editorial standards and trained reporters. The others are run by a guy in his living room whose only editorial standard is advertising revenue. It's just this guy. Don't trust this guy. So a good example of that latter problem is flooding social media this week, and you've probably seen it. There was an article in the Washington Post about it just yesterday too. Massive amounts of fake news stories about the novel coronavirus in China have been spreading like wildfire on Facebook, Google, and Twitter. And all 3 companies are trying to fight the flames back and pretty much losing that battle. An article claiming that oregano oil can cure you if you get infected has been shared thousands of times. And so has an article claiming that the US patented the very same virus many years ago, and this is a calculated test launched by our government. Yikes. You can bet the folks sharing those articles like crazy have not actually taken the time to do any research to try to confirm those claims. This is a huge problem. But even if you do know which news sources to trust, reporters covering health or science topics are not always super knowledgeable about a subject themselves, especially these days when newsroom staff have been cut in many places and reporters are now covering multiple beats. News organizations are also typically seeking digestible pieces that convey simple, accessible, and preferably novel information, something fundamentally in conflict with how science actually works. Science is slow, complicated, and frequently repetitive. So, given the volume of sources and the volume of articles in those sources, how can you tell if a news story you're looking at is valid? Well, I have 4 steps I typically recommend for that. The first one is check for other sources. So let's say your friend shared an article on Facebook and you've never heard of the news organization it's coming from. The first thing I always do is a search online for other news stories about the same thing. If you're using Google, you can do this really easily by just throwing in some key terms and clicking that news button at the top. Look around in the results for news sources you do know, more mainstream sources. Are they reporting on this too? And if they are they making the same conclusions the original article you saw made? If you're not sure what good mainstream news sources are, this media bias chart can help. The ones that are the most neutral in terms of bias are the ones right in the middle there. And I know this is hard to read because there's a lot of news sources on here, but I'll be sending these slides out later so you can take a closer look then. In the middle there, AP, CBS News, BBC, NPR, Washington Post, New York Times, and everybody's mom's favorite, the Weather Channel. There are a lot of bias charts out there, and of course, there is some bias involved in creating a bias chart, but for the most part, this one seems to use a good methodology for determining reliability and political skew, and so you can explore it more in detail later, and there's a link up there at the top if you want to go to the website as well. The next step is to go upstream. So news articles will often link to the original study paper or to a press release that links to the original study paper. And you want to click through links until you get to that paper, because sometimes the article you're reading on Facebook has gotten the information dramatically wrong. As an example, just the other day, a friend of mine on social media shared this article from a news source called Daily Health Post. The headline is, "Aspartame is linked to leukemia and lymphoma in landmark study on humans." The article says that significant links were found between drinking soda with aspartame in it and the development of leukemia and lymphoma. But if you go take a look at the actual study paper, which they even link to right in the first paragraph there, which is very rare, the first thing you'll notice is that this study is from 2012, hardly breaking news as reported by Daily Health Post. Go a little deeper into the paper, and you'll also find that the study actually found no increased risk for women whatsoever, and more increased risk for men who drank regular soda compared to diet. It then concludes by saying it couldn't rule out chance as the cause. In sharing the original article, though, my friend had gotten her friends, most of whom already believed aspartame was bad, to share it too, spreading the misinformation exponentially. Not one person clicked that link to the paper and read so much as the abstract, which had all the information I just said, including that bit about chance as an equally plausible explanation. Yikes. So going upstream, clicking back until you get to the original source of information. This is very important, particularly for any news article coming from a source you aren't familiar with, like Daily Health Post. The next step is to source the source. So once you've gotten to the original source of information, now you want to branch out from there and investigate that, the publication, the author's affiliation, and the study itself. Don't just accept any old journal article as truth, because reputable journals make mistakes, for one thing, and disreputable journals are rife, which I will be talking about a little bit later on. So do some poking around on Google and see what you can find out. Another really good place to look is on Twitter, where other scientists in the field are probably talking about it somewhere. So you want to try searching for some keywords in the study and see what comes up. Watch for accounts that have a blue check mark. Those folks have been verified to be who they say they are. So if they're representing themselves as scientists, that should be correct. For those without check marks, and really just to be sure about the blue check mark ones too, because why not? Be sure to check their bios on their Twitter profile pages and then search their name and institution in Google to make sure it's legit. If a bunch of other scientists are on social media criticizing flaws in a study's design, talking about misrepresentation of the real context of a study, something like that, that can help provide a deeper perspective about the subject than what you might get from a news article. And then finally, check yourself for confirmation bias. Honestly, always be the most suspicious of anything that appears to confirm what you already suspect to be true. We tend to believe without question something that corresponds to what we already think we know. And this kind of confirmation bias is often what leads to that sharing of bad news stories far and wide on social media. My friend believed aspartame was a dangerous substance, so she didn't read the piece critically. Corresponded to what she already knew, and so therefore it must be true, right? I generally will do the most digging on anything that confirms something I already think I know, because it often turns out I didn't know anything at all, which is actually very common. So to recap, when you're faced with a news article about a health-related topic like substance use disorders, you want to check for other reporting on the same thing and see if it corresponds. Go upstream to find the original source of the information. Go laterally from there to investigate that original source, and watch out for confirmation bias getting in the way of your ability to think critically. So what are some recommended news sites that have health-related information on them? Well, it's the obvious major players first. Major national newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times. It's also major regional newspapers like the Seattle Times, the Spokane Spokesman Review, the Oregonian, the Idaho Statesman, and the Anchorage Daily News. Also, news pieces from the Associated Press, NPR, PBS, etc. Established news sources that have been around for a long time. Another news-related site I recommend when you're looking for information related to substance use or health-related policy is factcheck.org, and specifically their science section, factcheck.org/SciCheck. Both of these sites are run by the Annenberg Center for Public Policy at UPenn, and they often will evaluate information about substance use as it connects to public policy. So you can find fact checks there on e-cigarettes, opioids, cannabis, and a lot of other stuff. Similarly, if you're looking to confirm something a politician or other public figure has recently said in a news piece, another great place to go is politifact.com, which is run by the Poynter Institute. You can search by topic or by someone's name and find a critical evaluation of what was said or proposed. And then finally, if you're going on social media websites looking for reputable information about health, my recommendation is that you start by following known institutions like ADAI, SAMHSA, NIDA, the ATTC network, and other organizations you trust like Faces and Voices of Recovery or the Partnership. And then news organizations, of course, the ones that you read regularly and already trust. And then also check out professional societies in the field like ASAM or AMERSA. Both of these last two frequently tweet about new research articles in the field. For example, And if you start to follow organizations like this, you'll begin to see what content they're sharing or retweeting, which can lead you to additional sources to check out too. Okay, so that's it for articles. News articles. Anyway, let's move into a much more complicated topic, which is websites in general. Okay, so thought experiment. Do you know how many websites there are on the internet these days? You're all muted, so just think of a guess in your head. Okay, you got your number? Did anybody guess 1.7 billion? Dang, that is a lot of websites. Now, not all of those websites are active. In some cases, they're just domain names that have been parked by someone and left stagnant. But still, there are a lot, and a lot of them are health or wellness related. Health and wellness websites are a huge industry these days. But like with Daily Health Post, the site my friend shared that article from, not all of them are reputable or reliable. So how can you tell? Well, we got another 5-point plan here. 5 major things to check for before deciding to trust a health or science website. And some of these also apply to news organizations as well, since those are websites too. So first, find out who runs the website and why. Any reputable website is going to make it easy for you to answer this question with an about page or a funding source of some kind clearly displayed. For example, this is one of the consumer health sites I recommend the most often, Medline Plus. When you look, you notice right at the top, it cites the US National Library of Medicine. And when you click on About Medline Plus, which is also right at the top, you'll see clearly Medline Plus is a service of the National Library of Medicine, the world's largest medical library, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. Now let's look at Daily Health Post. Nothing at the top, but there's a tiny About link at the bottom. If you click there, what you get is Daily Health Post is run by the Daily Health Post team. That's a little suspicious. If a site makes it hard to know who's in charge and who's paying for it, that is cause to keep looking. The end of a website URL can also help. For example, a .gov site is always a site run by a government agency, and these are generally fairly reputable sources with editorial standards and accountability. A .edu site is usually a school or university, also with standards and accountability. .org sites are typically a nonprofit organization like a professional group, but it's important to be aware that anyone can access that extension, including commercial businesses, so you want to dig a bit deeper on any .org sites before trusting them. And definitely dig around on any .com sites, those are all commercial businesses. Also be sure to take a look at ads too. Like, this doesn't necessarily mean the information presented is going to be invalid, but when the article is about the benefits of cannabis oil and the 2 most prominent visuals on the page are ads for cannabis oil, this is a good reason to go deeper. So there are a lot of fake websites out there that exist solely for clicks and advertising revenue, and you want to be on the lookout for that. The next thing you want to check is who wrote the information. So now you want to move past the site's homepage and take a critical look at the information it's making available. Does it have fact sheets or topic-specific pages? If it does, is it clearly citing sources for information? Can you tell who wrote the thing that you're reading? And if so, what can you find out about them? Are they actually an expert, or at least someone who's covered the same subject for a while? If there's no author cited, and instead it says something like this, by Mayo Clinic staff, that's a red flag for me. No offense to the Mayo Clinic, and this is not automatically cause for dismissal, but it does mean I can't vet the author's credentials, which means I won't be trusting this information without more fact checking. Third, check when it was written. Always, always check the date on things, especially before you share them on social media. Older information isn't necessarily invalid, but it isn't necessarily valid either. And definitely, if the information you're looking at has a date of 2019, but the primary source it's reporting on is from 2012, that means it's time to do a little more investigating. And last, number 4, does it make any sense? This might seem a little obvious, but really stop and think about what the website or article is telling you. Some key questions to ask yourself: does it seem logical given what you know about science? Most scientific studies, especially health-related ones, do not end with extremely definitive conclusions. So if a web page is telling you that cannabis definitely cures cancer, that's a red flag. Does it seem too good to be true? If an article is offering up some quick and easy solutions to a problem you know is pretty complicated, like addiction or behavioral health disorders, That's a red flag too. Next, is it written professionally? If it's about substance use disorders or other behavioral health issues, does it use neutral, non-stigmatizing language? If it's using terms like addict or junkie, dirty or clean, drug habit, replacement therapy, terms we know are actively harmful or outdated, it's almost definitely not written by an expert in the field. And again, does it confirm what I already believe or what I want to believe? If so, that's a good time to stop and make sure your own bias isn't muddling your critical thinking. So to recap, when you're evaluating a website, first look to see who runs the site and why. Then look to see who wrote the actual information and what their sources and credentials are. Check the date, and if it's fairly old, definitely look for more up-to-date sources. And finally, general critical thinking. Does this actually make sense? These steps should get you a little closer to figuring out if the website you're on is one you can trust. So what are some good websites you can use to find valid information about substance use disorders or health in general? Well, as I mentioned earlier, one of the first ones I recommend to people is Medline Plus, the consumer health information site run by the National Library of Medicine. You can search for specific topic here, including things like opioid use disorder, vaping, alcohol, cannabis use, etc. And you can pull up a list of curated resources that NLM has compiled on that subject. So as you can see in the middle there are typically resources available that cover a range of subtopics like diagnosis and tests, risk factors, different treatment options, etc. And many pages also have links to where you can find statistics about a topic, current clinical trials, and relevant journal articles as well. So there's a wealth of stuff here, and all of it is dependable, in my opinion. A few other reliable sources of information on this subject are the websites for the major federal organizations in our field. So that's the National Institute on Drug Abuse, or NIDA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, which is also the sponsor of the ATTC network, another great resource, obviously, and the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, or NIAAA. All of these sites have a lot of science-based information about a range of subjects related to substance use or behavioral health, including educational materials, fact sheets, curricula, treatment manuals, and more. And NIDA also has a great youth-friendly site too called NIDA for Teens. Another site I recommend a lot, and not just because it's on the ADII website, though that does mean I can personally attest to its validity, is the Find It Toolkit. This site was built to serve as a bit of a pathfinder for folks looking for information about substance use online, and it has curated collections of resources for data and statistics, trending topics like opioids and cannabis, and prevention and treatment. You can also follow a track geared toward a specific audience, professionals or providers, parents and community groups, college teachers, and students. Now, one of the hardest things to find online, in my experience, is good sources of data and statistics. That's why we made sure the Find It Toolkit had a whole section on that, including the major national sources pictured here. And just a reminder, this is coming to you later today, so you don't have to write all this down. It also has a ton of Washington state specific resources for data, including county level data. So if you're in Washington, definitely head over there to see what you can find. If you're looking for data about your own state though, a good place to start is your state's health department website. For example, the Oregon Health Authority has a really cool opioid data dashboard, as well as a lot of information about cannabis use and other substances. Idaho's Department of Health and Welfare has information on mortality related to substance use in their vital statistics reports. And they also have a page with data about drug overdoses, including calls to the state poison center related to overdose. It's pretty cool. In Alaska, the Division of Public Health for the state has a Center for Health Data that includes a lot of information about alcohol in particular, as well as health risks in Alaska among adults based on a state survey, and lots of other stuff too. Okay, so finally, let's talk about the third most common source of information about substance use disorders or health, scientific journal articles online. So let's say you've done your due diligence on a news article or a web page you came across, and you've managed to trace the information presented back to a paper in a journal about a research study. Great job. Now you want to read that paper to make sure it actually says what the news article or website says it says, right? So you click to open the link and you see I'm sorry, does that say I have to pay $55 for this one single article? It does. That's what that says. Well, I quit. Not so fast. Now, this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart as someone who's been advocating for more open access to science for a very long time. Over the last 20 years, I have seen the commodification of information for profit, expand to a really destructive level. And it's only been in the last year or so that there's finally been some concerted pushback on journal publishers who have been charging increasingly huge fees for their publications for years. A lot of folks thought that digital technology would revolutionize the impact of science on people's lives, and in some ways it has. For example, digital technology has helped decentralize information, so multiple users can access the same information at the same time, and information can now transcend geographical boundaries much more readily. But in terms of access to scholarly information, much of the same systems that acted as gatekeepers to science in print format are still in operation in the digital world. For example, here's what it costs for an online-only subscription to the journal Addiction. And you can see it's the same price as print. And frankly, some of that gatekeeping has gotten even worse thanks to digital rights management and prohibitively paywalled information architecture like that $55 fee. The open access movement, where journal articles and data sets would be made freely available to anyone, was developed in part to push back on this model. But open access has also turned out to be a real mixed bag. Some of it is great and is definitely contributing to the freedom of information and the dismantling of some of the harmful paywalled systems. But publishing your paper as open access costs you, the author, money. And the fees for this can be prohibitively high, especially for new scientists with smaller grants or scientists in non-Western countries. As an example, here's what an author has to pay to make their article open access from a few prominent publishers: thousands of dollars. Now, I could talk about this for hours, but instead I want to show you a few ways you can try to access those journal articles, even the ones that are stuck behind expensive paywalls or subscription services. And for this part, what I'm going to do is take a recent news article I saw being shared a lot on social media in the last week or so, and see if we can make it all the way back to the actual study paper to verify the claims. The news item I was seeing was about a new paper in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology about marijuana use and cardiovascular disease. So let's say we first saw it on this local CBS News affiliate site. Looking at the text here, the first red flag for me is that there's no link to the original study. And they don't even name one of the scientists involved in the study either. Instead, they're interviewing a cardiologist not involved with the study who is a, quote, CBS News medical contributor. I definitely want to look further before I trust the information I'm seeing here. So next what I do is Google some of the key terms, like marijuana, cardiovascular, and the university, or the source, the affiliation of the author, Brigham and Williams Hospital. Well, the first thing I'm noticing here is that there don't appear to be any major national news organizations reporting on this paper. That makes me think the reporters at the smaller news sites may not have fully understood the relevance of what they were reading, if they looked at the actual paper itself at all. That's not for sure, but I'm definitely wondering. Looking further down in the search results, I see something from PubMed, the National Library of Medicine's database of medical and health research. I know that's a reputable site and that it will have information I can use to get closer to finding this paper. So I click that, and now I have the PubMed record for the original paper being reported on. So how do I get a copy of this paper? The first place I'm going to check is PubMed Central, which is the free full-text counterpart to PubMed. Several years ago, the National Institutes of Health made it a rule that if you receive federal funding from them to do research, any articles you publish related to that research must be deposited into PubMed Central for free no later than a year after publication. That means a lot of full-text articles on substance use disorders and behavioral health can be found for free in PubMed Central. Pretty great. Since I have the article open in PubMed, checking to see if it's in PubMed Central is easy. You just want to look for a PMCID number, which is usually located right next to the PMID number. That sounds confusing, but if it had one, it would look like this. This is a different article, by the way. And it'll be a link that you can click on to open the full record. That PMC number circled there is a link. From there, this is the PMC record. You'll see that you can read it right here on the web page, or you can download it in a bunch of different formats. This is all for free. Our paper doesn't have a PMC ID, probably because it's brand new. Some publishers have short embargo periods, which is the period of time between the publication of a paper and when they allow it to be available for free in PMC, and some go for the full 12 months. This is an Elsevier journal, so you can bet they're holding out for 12 months. All is not lost, though. Most major publishers now allow authors to post their final accepted manuscripts on their institutional websites or to deposit them in online repositories or databases. That means if an author does this, they're sharing with you the final version of their paper, the same text that will eventually be in the academic journal, just without the fancy formatting, for free. It sounds amazing, right? The bad news is that a lot of scientists do not know they can do this and also mistakenly believe that doing this will somehow detract from the metrics or credibility of their published paper later. The good news, though, is that if this has happened somewhere on the internet, that paper is findable. The first thing to try to find it then is simply Googling all or part of the title. Put it in quotes to help narrow the results down a little bit. If that doesn't work, take a look at the first author and find out where they're located. Many universities have their own repositories, and you can find them by Googling the name of the university and the word repository. For example, here's the University of Washington's, and here's a paper from the one and only ADAI researcher I have managed to talk into doing this, but I will keep trying. So anyway, I Google the paper, I don't find anything. But before I give up on this, I'm also going to go to double check the major repository for medical and biological articles, which is biorxiv.org. This is where a lot of scientists are posting their manuscripts these days. So I put the title in there and I search no dice. There's also a relatively new one built by Yale University and the publisher BMJ for health sciences articles, MedRxiv, and there's probably a cool way to pronounce all of these, but I don't get out much. So anyway, not in there either. Although this is such a new repository, that's not a huge surprise. I think it's only about a year and a half old. Getting desperate here to get this paper, it's time for the last resort, which is contacting one of the authors. I actually never had to do this because I work at a university where I can get articles through library loan. I'm very spoiled in that way. So I decided to test this method out this week to see if it actually worked. There are two ways to approach reaching out to the author. And I decided to try both of them because why not? The first approach is still locked down for folks who work at universities or research organizations only, so only those folks can use this. But not every university library has a subscription to every journal, and some charge fees for getting you a PDF of something they don't carry. So if that's the scenario you're living in, try this approach, and this approach is ResearchGate. ResearchGate is sort of a LinkedIn type platform for researchers, and if you sign up for an account and you're approved, you can try searching for the paper in their system. If it appears like this one does, here's our paper, click the request full text button and see what happens, basically. So I did this for our example paper. I typed a friendly little message to whomever was going to get my request, and I immediately thought to myself, there is no way this is going to work. Anyway, I clicked send anyway. So I also tried the second method, which anyone can use, and that is to simply email one of the authors and ask if they'll send you a copy. Why not, right? If you find the article in PubMed and then you click to view everybody's affiliations, one of the authors will have provided an email address you can use to reach out. In this case, it's the last author. So I sent that guy an email to see if he'd be willing to share a copy with me. And I fully expected not to hear back. After all, this is a doctor. Doctors are busy. This is never going to work. Well, oh yeah, check it out. Just about 12 hours later, I had a response from both ResearchGate and the author. Amazing. 2 copies of the article for free. And in less than a day, pretty impressive. Now, will this always work? Almost surely not. But it's definitely going to be worth a try if you've tried everything else. Okay, so now you have the journal article. How do you go about parsing it to try to figure out if what news stories are reporting is really what the paper is reporting? Librarians who do a lot of searches or literature reviews get to be pretty good at figuring out how to summarize the major points of a paper quickly. And the trick to that is, don't read the whole thing. You do not have to do that. Instead, try this. First, read the first few paragraphs of the introduction section, or the whole introduction if you get sucked in. Some of them are quite good. This is going to put the study to follow in some kind of context for you. It'll typically explain the current state of the science on the relevant subject and what unanswered question the study was designed to address. Next is when you want to read the abstract. Some people do that first, but I think you should do it second. There's usually going to be a little bit of everything in there, from introduction to the study methods to the results and conclusions. So it's an obvious good choice for an overview. Now you want to flip to the end of the paper and look for a section called discussion. Here's where the authors will summarize what they learned from the study. They'll typically also tell you what the results don't mean, which is very important information that news articles often miss. You want to also watch for a section around here labeled limitations too. Here, the authors will describe some things that should be considered when thinking about the applicability of their results more generally, like some limiting factor in the methodology or the research process. And then finally, finish up by reading the conclusion, which is often just 1 or 2 paragraphs right at the very end, and it'll offer a good summary of the key points again. From there, you can usually determine if a study paper is saying the same thing a news article is. In the case of our paper on cardiovascular disease and marijuana use, did it match what news articles were saying? Well, the answer is yes, depending on the news article. Some of them overstated the results, like this one that says, study says heart disease patients should not use cannabis. The paper itself is not that definitive about it. The authors note that few randomized clinical trials exploring this connection have been done or are even being planned. More research is needed, they say, but doctors might want to talk to their patients who have heart disease about their cannabis use just in case. Okay, bonus round. It's time to talk about predatory open access journals. Rawr. Every time I see predatory, I think shark. So in the last decade or so, as the open access movement has grown, so too has the predatory open access movement, an exploitative academic publishing model that involves charging high fees to authors without checking articles for quality or legitimacy and without providing the other editorial services like peer review that legitimate academic journals, open access or otherwise, provide. These journals are described as predatory because they often try to trick scientists into thinking they are real, reputable journals. As this model started to build about 10 years ago, scientists and reputable journal publishers began to notice some strange things happening. Some of them were being inundated with spam, trying to entice them into publishing in a specific journal. This is an example of an email I just got the other day addressed to Dr. Brunner Meg. Suspicious. A couple of savvy folks started to do some testing of the suspect journals, like when a Cornell University graduate student submitted a manuscript consisting of computer-generated nonsense to one of the suspicious journals and had it accepted for a high fee. Here's a sample from that paper about red-black trees, vacuum tubes, and courseware. Does not make sense. And this experiment has been replicated a number of times, sometimes in pretty humorous ways, like this one, Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs by Pinkerton LeBrain and Orson Welles. Yeah. In 2015, a librarian at the University of Colorado in Denver named Jeffrey Beall started noticing a lot of very suspicious requests to serve on journal editorial boards. Here's one that I just got last week. The emails often contained a lot of grammatical errors, like Dr. Author, for example, and when he went to investigate the journals, they looked very suspicious. Over time, Beall began developing some criteria for categorizing publications as predatory, and he started to build a list of suspicious titles and publishers. Beall's list, as it was called, took off, getting a lot of attention in academia and publishing. Eventually, one of the publishers he cited as potentially predatory threatened to open a misconduct case against Beall, and his list was taken down, although you can still find archives of it online. Since then, some other lists have cropped up here and there, but none of them are comprehensive. So it's important that everybody be made aware of some key ways to tell if an open access journal is legitimate or not. So here are a few things you want to look for. First, you want to do a web search for the journal's title. I'm going to search for the one that published that Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs by Orson Welles paper, Global Journal of Otolaryngology. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. When I search for this journal, I find nothing in the top 5 results, which is a yellow card, and nothing on the first page of results at all, red card. Next, is the journal indexed in major databases? If you go to PubMed, you'll see a link under the search box that says journals. Click on that, and you can search for the journal title to see if it's indexed in PubMed. I searched for our favorite journal here, and no items were found. That's also a bad sign. Next, go to the journal's webpage and check the editorial board. Are there names and affiliations or just names? Is there an editorial board listed at all? If you Google some of the names and affiliations, do they appear to be legitimate? Our journal had several editors listed, and when I Googled the first one, John Nathan of University of Alabama, I found nothing. That is a bad, bad sign. Now look more critically at the journal website itself. Does it look professionally designed, or is it riddled with grammatical errors? Looking at Global Journal of Otolaryngology, the design is a bit off, but it's not terrible. All the links worked. That's a good sign. But when you look closer at the description of this journal, it says things like JGO is an open access journal. And the grammar is just a little bit off. So yeah, this gets a predatory rar from me. And then finally, check to see if the journal clearly states its peer review process, its author fees, its copyright policies, stuff like that. This journal did have a PDF outlining its peer review process posted on it, but again, it's also the journal that published Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs by Orson Welles. I cannot get over this. I love this so much. Okay, if you want to learn more about predatory publishing, a great site is the Think, Check, Submit site, which helps researchers identify trusted journals for their papers, but also has a lot of great information for the rest of us too. So that's a good resource to check out. Okay, so that was a lot of information really fast. I talk really fast. That's never helpful. So let's boil the whole webinar down to 30 seconds. For all 3 commonly used sources of information on substance use and health, news articles, websites, and journals, the key to determining if something is valid is to check the source you're using, find the original source of information, and be logical about what you're reading. And we made it. Whew. Here is my contact information, and if you have any questions, fire away in the chat box, and you're also, of course, welcome to email me at any time later. And that's
Great.
it for me.
Thank you, Meg. That was great information. We really appreciate your time today. I'm going to give people a minute to type their questions into the chat box, and in the meantime, just do a little reminder to fill out our evaluation survey from the webinar today by clicking on the link that will be included in an email that'll be sent out later today. And I think we also have it, posted in the chat box, so you could click on it from there.
Nice. And
then we also have, oh, there's that. And then our next webinar will take place on February 26th. It's titled, and I think it's a little different. I think it's changed since we posted this. It's called Addressing the Addiction Crisis, Moving Upstream with Holistic Strategies. And that's presented by Dr. Gary Ferguson. So I'm gonna go through here. Oh, we got a comment. One was, I appreciate the pace of your presentation and information.
Oh, good. Wow.
It was great.
Thanks.
Wonderful. One of the most helpful webinars I've ever viewed. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, this is awesome.
And looks like this one's a question. How to counteract misinformation, false information? We have a local group spreading disinformation about MAT, and it's very tough to stop the spread of that false information.
Yeah, well, okay, that's a tricky one. It's it's hard to know exactly what to recommend without knowing like what the interpersonal dynamics there are. But if they're spreading misinformation on social media, it's always worth commenting in a very polite way with the corrective information. If it's a group that's like talking to other groups and spreading misinformation that way, maybe talking to the head of that group and presenting them with actual data and science and better sources could help, or you can send them to this webinar perhaps, I don't know. It's always a tricky situation. Definitely correcting people on Facebook can sometimes blow up in your face, but I still think it's worth doing, especially if it's something as important as that, where it can really impact people. So yeah, I guess just see what you can do. Keep trying.
Great. We have one more that's come in. My former doc students are always getting appeals from suspect journals. Would their first stop be think, check, submit?
I don't know. It might not be a bad first place to check, but definitely I think they should follow the steps that I just presented, where you Google the title of the journal, you take a look and see if it's indexed in PubMed or the other major databases. And then you take a look at a lot of these spam emails in particular, you can tell right away that they're fake because they say things like Dr. Brunner Meg at the top, or I got one that was Dr. Brunner, which was fun. And they often have grammatical errors. They'll often be signed without an actual SIG file, so you don't even see an affiliation or anything. They might have fake links in them. They often are pleading with you, like, you're so amazing, please publish in our journal. I know that's not true. I am not amazing. Stop saying that. So like starting with those emails, it's just learning to read those emails really critically and looking out for grammar and punctuation and misspellings and strange language choices is always a really good sign. And then just Google the name of the journal and see what you can find out about it.
Great. Let's see, moving on to, this one was more of just an affirmation of what you've been saying, but on Facebook, I'm always seeing out-of-date articles. It is very important to look at the date to prevent spreading outdated information and articles.
Yes.
This is what you've been saying all along, so that's great.
Amen. That's great.
And here's another question. Do you have a recommended database of EBPs, evidence-based practices for SUD, like, I'm going to butcher this, NREP was, although it wasn't well maintained?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that is no. NREP was replaced by something, and I can't think of the name of it now, but it's not the same kind of thing. I think they gave up on trying to figure out what things were evidence-based, what things were promising practices or whatever, because it can be very difficult to do that. ADAI has an EBP database, but we also haven't been keeping that up to date recently. I'm just not sure what to recommend there because everyone I've talked to about this has said there just is no resource like that right now. So, sorry. I guess maybe we should all build one.
Okay, next question is, can you speak to when academics publish in journals and pay for it? How is this seen by the industry? If they are not crazy off the wall journals?
So I think it's actually a great thing when authors publish in legitimate open access journals. And a lot of times those article processing fees, those thousands of dollar fees, are things that you're building into your grants now with the expectation that you'll be paying this to put it in a reputable journal to make it open access for everybody. But there also is so much pressure for scientists to publish that some of them get a little desperate and will publish in these disreputable journals and promote that paper in their CV, and it just spreads all of this bad information everywhere and just sort of feeds into this predatory market too. But definitely scientists that are publishing articles should think about this new ability they have to publish the final version of their manuscript on their own institution's websites. You can even email it out to people or put it on social media, whatever you want to do. Every major publisher lets you do that now, and it really needs to be the thing folks start doing more of, because it's how you get your science out to the people who really can use it without a year or longer of a delay. So that's what I say to that.
Great. It looks like the rest of these are all comments saying thank you for the great information. And so if nobody else has any of the other questions, we'll go ahead and close out for the day. Thank you for taking our survey, and thank you, Meg, for presenting today. This was wonderful. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jen.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.